Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I clocked in for my morning shift at the smoothie shop at 6:30, which meant I was the one responsible for getting everything set up before we opened at 7. The morning prep wasn't too bad, honestly. I had to restock the fruit containers, make sure all the blenders were clean, and double check that we had enough protein powder and other add-ins for the day. By the time I flipped the sign to open and unlock the front door, I was already wiping down the counter and ready to go. The first customers trickled in slowly. A guy in a suit ordered a large green smoothie with extra spinach. A woman asked for something with mango and asked me 3 times if I was sure there was no added sugar. I made both orders without any issues, handed them over, and watched them head out to start their days. It was peaceful. Then at 7:15, this delivery driver walked in. I could tell right away he was picking up an order because he had that look on his face. Like he was already annoyed before he even said anything. I greeted him and asked what name the order was under. He said it was for Alex. I pulled up the order on the screen and saw it was 2 smoothies, but I was still finishing up another online order that had come in a few minutes earlier. I told him I'd have his order ready in just a few minutes and suggested he could take a seat in the waiting area if he wanted. We have a bench and a couple of chairs set up specifically for people waiting on their orders. Most delivery drivers either sit down and scroll through their phones or step outside to their car. Some of them even chat with me while I work, asking about my day or making small talk about the weather. Not this guy. He just stood there at the end of the counter. Didn't sit, didn't pull out his phone, and didn't say a word. He just locked his eyes on me and stared. At first, I thought maybe he didn't hear me when I told him to take a seat, so I didn't think too much of it. I turned my attention back to the order I was working on, which was a berry blast smoothie with added chia seeds and almond milk. I grabbed the frozen berries from the freezer, measured them out, and tossed them into the blender. Then I added the chia seeds, poured in the almond milk, and hit the blend button. The blender roared to life, and for those 30 seconds or so, I didn't have to think about anything else. But when I turned it off and started pouring the smoothie into a cup, I felt it again. That stare. I looked up and sure enough, the driver was still standing there in the exact same spot, still staring directly at me, not looking at the menu board on the wall, not checking his phone, not doing anything except watching me like I was some kind of entertainment. It was so uncomfortable. I finished pouring the smoothie, snapped a lid on it, grabbed a straw, and set it aside with the rest of that customer's order. Then I pulled up the delivery driver's order on the screen to see what I was working with. 2 smoothies. One was a strawberry banana protein smoothie with whey protein powder. The other was a tropical blend with mango, pineapple, and coconut milk. I grabbed the containers from the fridge and started pulling out the ingredients. The whole time I could feel his eyes on me. It wasn't just a casual look either. It was intense, like he was trying to burn a hole through the side of my head with his stare. I've had impatient customers before, people who tap their fingers on the counter, people who keep checking their watches and sighing loudly, people who ask me every 30 seconds how much longer it's going to be. But this was different. This wasn't just impatience. This was aggressive, like he was trying to intimidate me into working faster. And honestly, it pissed me off, so I made a decision right then and there. I was going to slow down. I'm usually pretty fast at making smoothies. I've been doing this long enough that I can knock out most orders in 3 or 4 minutes without breaking a sweat. But this guy wanted to stand there and glare at me like I was doing something wrong? Fine. I'd take my time. I started with the strawberry banana protein smoothie. I carefully measured out the strawberries, making sure I had the exact amount. Then I peeled a banana, broke it into pieces, and dropped them into the blender one by one. I scooped out the protein powder, making absolutely sure it was level and not heaped. Then I poured in the milk, taking my time to make sure I didn't spill a single drop. The whole process probably took an extra minute or 2 longer than it normally would have, but I didn't care. The driver let out this loud, exaggerated huff, like he was trying to make a point. I didn't even look at him, just kept doing what I was doing. I put the lid on the blender and hit the button. Normally, I might stop the blender a few seconds early if I can see that everything's already mixed together. But not this time. I let that thing run for the full cycle until it automatically shut off. Then I poured the smoothie into a cup, nice and slow, making sure to scrape every last bit out of the blender. I grabbed the lid, snapped it on, and set it aside. Another huff from the end of the counter. I started on the second smoothie, grabbed the mango chunks from the freezer, counted out the pineapple pieces, poured the coconut milk. The driver shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and I could see out of the corner of my eye that his arms were crossed now, still staring, still not saying a word, just standing there like some kind of security guard watching over a prisoner. I put the second smoothie in the blender and hit the button. While it was blending, I took the opportunity to wipe down the counter, reorganize the straws, and check the receipt printer to see if any new orders had come in. There was one, but it wasn't urgent. When the blender stopped, I poured the tropical smoothie into a cup, grabbed 2 straws, and placed one in each smoothie. Then I double-checked the order ticket on the screen to make absolutely sure I had everything right. I did. I put both smoothies in a carrier and set it on the counter in front of him. I told him his order was ready, 2 smoothies for Alex. He didn't say thank you, didn't acknowledge me at all really. He just grabbed the carrier with one hand and turned toward the door. But as he was walking away, he said something under his breath. I couldn't make out the exact words, but I caught enough of it to know it wasn't anything nice. Something about me being slow or wasting his time. The door swung shut behind him, and I just stood there for a second, staring at the empty space where he'd been standing. I felt bad for whoever ordered that food. Like, genuinely bad. Because their delivery driver was clearly having a terrible morning, and he was taking it out on everyone around him. I get that. Delivery drivers are under a lot of pressure. They're trying to hit as many orders as possible in a short amount of time so they can make decent money. I understand that. But standing there and staring someone down while they're making your order isn't going to make anything go faster. If anything, it's going to have the opposite effect. At least it did with me. I walked over to the sink and started washing the blender containers, still replaying the whole thing in my head. The staring, the huffing, the entitled attitude like I owed him something beyond just doing my job. A few minutes later, one of my regular customers came in. She's this older woman who comes in every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the same smoothie, a peach mango blend with Greek yogurt. I greeted her with a smile and she asked me how my morning was going. I told her it was fine, just dealing with the usual morning rush. She laughed and said she could imagine. While I made her smoothie, she told me about her weekend, how she'd gone hiking with her daughter and almost twisted her ankle on a rock. We chatted back and forth and it was nice, normal. The kind of interaction that reminds me why I don't actually hate this job most of the time. I handed her the smoothie and she thanked me before heading out. That's how it's supposed to go. And that's how most people act when they come in here. But that delivery driver, he could stand to learn a thing or two about basic human decency. If you want someone to prioritize your order, maybe don't stand there making them feel like they're being interrogated. Just a thought. I went back to wiping down the counter, and by the time I finished, another customer had walked in. The morning rush was starting to pick up and I didn't have time to think about entitled drivers anymore. But I knew one thing for sure. If that guy ever came back, I'd be taking my time again. I picked up chess when I was around 4 years old. My extended family was obsessed with the game, so growing up meant being surrounded by chessboards and strategy talk at every family gathering. By the time I was a teenager, I was competing in local tournaments. These days, my rating sits at just over 1950, which I'm pretty proud of. A few years back, I started dating my girlfriend. When lockdown happened, she was bored out of her mind and asked me to teach her chess. I was thrilled. I spent weeks walking her through the basics, explaining openings and common tactics, playing slow games where I'd deliberately make mistakes so she could practice spotting opportunities. She picked it up faster than I expected. When lockdown ended, she stopped playing for almost 2 years. Life got busy, and chess just wasn't a priority for her anymore. But a couple months ago, she randomly downloaded a chess app and started playing online again. She mostly stuck to opponents at her level, which seemed to be working well for her. She was winning about half her games and seemed to enjoy it. Then she asked if we could start playing together on the physical board we have at home. I said sure, thinking it would be fun to play casually in the evenings. We started playing almost every night after dinner. Here's where things got complicated. I beat her every single time, not close games either. Most of them were pretty decisive victories. At first, she took it well. She'd laugh it off, say she was rusty, ask me to explain what she did wrong. I point out her mistakes and suggest better moves. She seemed genuinely interested in improving. But after a couple weeks, I noticed her mood changing. She started getting quiet during games. When I'd capture an important piece or put her in a tough position, she'd sigh heavily or mutter to herself. A few times she accused me of not taking it easy on her. I told her I wasn't going to just let her win because that's not how anyone gets better. She responded that I could at least make it somewhat competitive since it wasn't fun losing every single time. I pointed out that she was playing people at her level online and doing fine, so if she practiced more, she'd improve. She insisted it was different playing me because I was so much better that she couldn't even see the mistakes coming. I understood her frustration, but I also remembered how I learned. Nobody ever gave me free wins. I lost hundreds of games before I started winning consistently. That's just how chess works. You have to put in the time and effort. You have to study, analyze your games, and accept that losing is part of the process. When I was teaching her during lockdown, sure, I'd occasionally let her win or make obvious blunders so she could practice tactics. But she wasn't a complete beginner anymore. She understood how the pieces moved. She knew basic strategy, and she was competing online. Giving her wins now felt patronizing and pointless. Yesterday evening, we set up the board usual. The game started normally. She opened with her favorite pawn structure, and I responded with a solid setup. By move 15, I had a significant advantage. She'd left a knight undefended, and I captured it. She stared at the board for a long moment. She said, "Of course I saw that, noting that I see everything." I told her she'd start seeing those patterns too if she kept playing. She responded that it was easy for me to say since I've been playing since I was 4 years old. The game continued. I pressed my advantage carefully, trading pieces when it benefited me, improving my position steadily. By move 25, I was clearly winning. She had fewer pieces, her king was exposed, and she had no real counterplay. She studied the board, her jaw tight. I could see her trying to find something, anything to turn things around, but there wasn't anything there. Then, without warning, she swept her hand across the board and flipped it completely over. Pieces scattered across the floor. The board clattered against the table edge. She sat back in her chair, arms crossed, staring at the mess. I was stunned. This wasn't a playful flip or a joke. Her face was dead serious, frustrated and angry. I asked her what that was. She said she was sick of losing every single game and that it was humiliating. I asked if she seriously just threw a tantrum like a child and flipped the board. She told me not to talk to her like she was a child. I responded that she shouldn't act like one then, explaining that it's chess and people lose sometimes, actually lose a lot when they're learning, and that's completely normal. She insisted I didn't understand what it was like since I'd always been good at this. I shot back that I'd lost more games than she'd probably played in her entire life, and I didn't flip boards over it. She just said whatever. I started picking up the pieces from the floor, genuinely angry now. I'd spent time teaching her, playing with her, trying to help her improve, and this was how she responded, by literally flipping the board because she couldn't handle losing. I told her that maybe she should stick to playing online until she could handle losing like an adult. I explained that chess requires focus and maturity, and if she couldn't deal with losing without throwing things around, then we shouldn't play together. Her face went red. She asked if I was serious. I said I was completely serious and that I wasn't going to sit there playing a game that takes mental effort just to watch her disrespect it because she was frustrated. I told her to grow up and handle it properly or don't play with me at all. She stood up and walked out of the room without another word. I heard the bedroom door slam a few seconds later. I finished picking up the pieces and put the board away. Part of me felt bad for being so harsh, but another part felt completely justified. Chess isn't just a casual game to me. It's something I've dedicated years to. Flipping the board felt like she was mocking that. She didn't come out for the rest of the night. This morning she barely spoke to me, just gave me cold looks while making coffee. When I tried to talk to her, she said I embarrassed her and made her feel stupid. She thinks I should have been more understanding instead of telling her to grow up. But I stand by what I said. If she can't lose a chess game without literally flipping the board, then she is not ready to play seriously. And I'm not interested in playing games just to hand out participation trophies. I've been seeing my girlfriend for about 4 months when I decided I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. Looking back, I know it sounds crazy, but at the time everything felt right. We'd met at a coffee shop on a rainy afternoon. She'd been rushing to grab her order and accidentally spilled her latte all over my laptop bag. Instead of getting annoyed, I'd laughed it off and helped her clean up the mess. We started talking while waiting for fresh drinks, and I found myself completely drawn to her. She was witty and charming, with this infectious laugh that made everything seem brighter. We exchanged numbers that day, and by the end of the week we were having dinner together. Before I knew it, we were spending every free moment together. She'd come over after work and we'd cook together, or we'd go out exploring new restaurants in the city. On weekends, we'd drive out to the beach or hike trails I'd never bothered to visit before. Everything felt easy and natural. Or at least that's what I thought. There were little things that should have been red flags, but I was too wrapped up in the romance to notice. Like how she always expected me to pay for everything, even when she suggested the expensive places. One time I'd mentioned maybe staying in and watching a movie instead of going to this upscale steakhouse she wanted to try. She'd pouted for the rest of the evening and barely spoke to me. I ended up taking her to the restaurant anyway, where the bill came out to $230. She'd also make comments about my apartment not being nice enough. She said the neighborhood was too far from downtown and that my furniture looked like I'd gotten it from a thrift store, which I had, but that wasn't the point. My car was another target. She'd wrinkle her nose every time we took it anywhere and suggest I should upgrade to something newer. But I brushed it all aside because I was convinced I was in love. I'd even started looking at nicer apartments closer to where she lived, thinking maybe we'd move in together eventually. I'd been putting aside money from each paycheck, saving up for the ring I wanted to give her. It took me 3 months to save enough, working extra hours and cutting back on everything else. The ring cost me $1,800, which was more than I'd ever spent on anything in my life. But she was worth it. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. So there I was, down on one knee in the park where we'd had our first real date. It was a Sunday evening, around 6:30, and the sun was starting to set. I'd picked this spot specifically because she'd mentioned once how romantic it was. I'd saved up for months to buy the ring. It wasn't massive or anything, but it was a decent diamond on a white gold band. The jeweler had assured me it was a quality piece. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the box. I asked her to marry me. I looked up at her with hope in my eyes, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Her expression went from surprise to something I couldn't quite read. Then she laughed. Not a happy laugh, a mocking one. She asked if I was being serious right now. I told her I was, that I loved her and wanted to spend my life with her. She said we'd only been together for like 4 months and that this was insane. She asked what made me think she'd want to marry someone like me. I felt my heart sink into my stomach. The embarrassment was crushing. A couple walking their dog had stopped to watch, probably expecting a happy moment. Instead, they were witnessing my humiliation. I said I knew it was fast, but when you know, you know. I told her I thought we had something special. She said no. The answer was no. She said it again, louder this time, like she wanted to make sure I understood. I stood up slowly, my knees aching from kneeling on the hard ground. I closed the ring box and started to put it back in my pocket. My face was burning and I just wanted to disappear. That's when things took a turn I never could have predicted. She told me to wait and to give her the ring. I stopped mid-motion and stared at her. I asked her what she meant. She repeated herself, telling me to give her the ring. Her hand was actually extended, palm up, like she expected me to just hand it over. I reminded her that she just said no. She said so what? That she still deserved it because she put up with me for months. She listed off my boring stories about work, my terrible taste in movies, and that awful apartment of mine. She mentioned the ugly car I drove and how I never wanted to spend money on nice things. She said she could have been out with her friends those nights instead of sitting on my cheap couch. She said the least I could do was give her the ring as payment for her time. I actually laughed. The absurdity of what she was saying was too much. I asked if she was out of her mind, saying the word payment like I couldn't believe I'd heard it right. She insisted she was serious and told me to hand it over. She said she'd earned it. She'd dated me, hadn't she? She'd pretended to enjoy my company. She'd spent 4 months of her life on me. I asked how she'd earned it by dating me and told her that's not how any of this works. She said she could have been with so many other guys, better guys, richer guys, guys with actual careers and nice apartments, but she'd chosen to waste her time with me. So yes, she'd earned that ring. The couple with the dog had started recording on their phone. I noticed a few other people had stopped to watch too. A jogger had paused on the path. An elderly man on a bench was looking over. My face was burning with humiliation but also anger now. I told her I was leaving and that this was insane. I told her she was out of her mind if she thought I was giving her anything. I turned my back to her and started walking toward the parking lot. I just wanted to get to my car and go home and pretend this entire disaster never happened. That's when I felt her weight crash into my back. She'd literally jumped on me, her arms wrapped around my neck, and she was hitting me with her fists. Not hard enough to really hurt, but hard enough to be shocking. She was screaming something about the ring, about me being selfish, about how I owed her. She kept yelling that she deserved it, that I was a terrible person for trying to leave with it. For a second, I just stood there in complete disbelief. Then instinct kicked in. I reached back, grabbed her arms, and pulled her off my back. She went down hard, landing flat on the ground with a thud that made me wince. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She lay there for a moment, gasping for air. Then she started screaming that I'd assaulted her and that everyone had seen it. She was yelling for someone to call 911. The guy with the phone stepped forward and told her that they'd all seen her attack me first, and that I was defending myself. He said he had the whole thing on video. She insisted that wasn't true, that I'd thrown her to the ground for no reason. She said she wanted that ring and demanded someone call the police. She said I'd assaulted her and tried to steal from her. I pointed out that she jumped on my back and started hitting me, asking what she expected me to do. I said the ring was mine and I'd bought it with my own money. A small crowd had gathered now. A woman in jogging clothes spoke up and said she'd seen the whole thing. She described how my girlfriend had said no to the proposal, then demanded the ring, then attacked me when I tried to leave. An older man added that he'd watched her jump on my back and start hitting me. My girlfriend called them all liars and said I was the one who should be arrested. She was still on the ground looking up at everyone. I pulled out my phone and said, "Fine, let's call the cops then." I pointed out that there were probably 5 people here with video evidence of her assaulting me. I told her I'd be happy to press charges. Her face went pale. She scrambled to her feet, brushing dirt off her clothes. She told me to forget it, to keep my stupid cheap ring. She said $1,800 was nothing anyway. She said she could get a better one from literally anyone else. She said she had guys messaging her all the time who would treat her better than I ever did. I told her I was sure she could and wished her good luck with that. She walked off toward her car, still yelling insults over her shoulder. She called me a loser and said I'd never find anyone else. She said I'd be alone forever with my ugly apartment and ugly car. I stood there shaking, the ring box still clutched in my hand. The dog walker patted me on the shoulder and said I dodged a bullet there. He said any woman who acts like that isn't worth marrying. The jogger agreed and said she hoped I was okay. I nodded, unable to speak. When I finally made it to my car, I sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, just staring at the ring box. 4 months of my life. All those savings. All those dreams I built up in my head about our future together. The apartment I'd been looking at. The plans I'd made. I drove home in silence. When I got to my apartment, the same apartment she'd always complained about. I felt nothing but relief. I put the ring in my desk drawer and ordered pizza. The delivery guy showed up 45 minutes later with a large pepperoni. The bill was $15 and I gave him a 20 and told him to keep the change. My phone buzzed with angry texts from her for the next few hours. She said I was a terrible person. She said I owed her for wasting her time. She said she'd tell everyone what I'd done. She said she'd ruin my reputation. I finally blocked her number around 9:30 that night. The texts stopped. 2 weeks later, I returned the ring and got most of my money back. The jeweler gave me $1,500, which was better than I'd expected. I used it to take a solo trip to the mountains. I spent 5 days hiking and camping, not thinking about her once. My house had a tiny concrete slab that barely counted as a step, let alone a porch. My wife and I wanted something proper, with an overhang to keep the rain off and enough space for a couple of chairs. We hired a designer through a recommendation from a coworker. He seemed professional enough. At our first meeting, showed us some previous projects, quoted us a reasonable price, $5,000 to draw up the plans, submit everything to the city, handle the permits, and oversee the initial approval process. We figured it was worth it to have someone who knew what they were doing guide us through the bureaucracy. We paid him half up front, $2,500. That was in March. The designer came by twice in the first 2 weeks. He measured everything, took photos, asked about our vision. We told him what we wanted: a covered porch big enough for 2 rocking chairs and maybe a small table, an overhang to protect from rain. Simple stuff. He promised to have preliminary drawings within 2 weeks. 3 weeks went by. Nothing. I called him. He apologized and said he'd been swamped with other work. He promised to have something to me by Friday. Friday came and went. No drawings. I called again the following Monday. He acknowledged he was behind again and blamed it on how crazy things had been. He assured me I'd have the drawings by end of week for sure. Another week passed. Still nothing. This pattern continued for almost 2 months. Every time I called, he had an excuse. His computer crashed. His other projects ran over. His kid got sick. Always something. Finally, in early May, he emailed over the drawings. They looked professional enough to my untrained eye. The porch was the right size, the overhang looked good in the rendering. We approved them, and he said he'd submit to the city right away. Then silence again. I'd email asking for updates. He'd respond a week later saying the city was backed up, everything was in the queue, just had to wait. I didn't know enough about the process to question it, so I just waited. June passed. July passed. Every few weeks I'd send an email. He'd give me the same response about city delays and backlogs. Finally, in late August, he called me. He told me he'd heard back from the city. They had approved the plans, but there was one issue that needed fixing. I asked what kind of issue. He explained that the clearance on the overhang was too low. Building code required 7 feet minimum clearance for a porch covering, and we only had 6'8". I asked how that happened. He said these things came up sometimes, but not to worry because we could fix it. We'd just need to submit a change order and use different materials for the overhang structure. It would add about $600 to the project. $600 for his mistake. I asked why this wasn't caught before we submitted. I pointed out that building code was something he should know. He told me to look, he designs these things, but I had approved the plans. He said I should have caught that if I'd looked closely enough at the specifications. I felt my jaw tighten. I reminded him that he was the licensed designer. I'd hired him specifically because I didn't know building codes. That was literally what I was paying him for. He acknowledged that, but said the drawings clearly showed the measurements. He claimed that if I'd reviewed them more carefully, I would have seen the clearance was under code. He said he couldn't be expected to catch everything. I told him that was exactly what I expected him to catch. That was his entire job. He said, well, he was 5'6". That clearance would work fine for him. He didn't think it would be a problem. I laughed. I asked if he seriously designed a porch based on his height instead of building codes. He backpedaled and said he was just saying it wasn't like he intentionally made an error, but fixing it was going to require different materials and another submission to the city. That was extra work, which was why there was a change order fee. I asked if he was serious. He said he'd already drawn up the revised plans. Once I approved the change order and sent payment, he could resubmit. I took a breath. My wife was watching me from across the room, mouthing words I couldn't quite make out. I held up a finger. I told him to let me be very clear. He was the professional I hired. I paid him $2,500 already, with another $2,500 due on completion. Part of what I paid for was his expertise in local building codes. He submitted plans that didn't meet code, and now he wanted me to pay extra to fix his mistake. He said it wasn't really a mistake, more of an oversight. I pointed out that those were the same thing. I told him no, I wasn't paying him anything extra. He was going to fix this, resubmit the corrected plans, and do it right this time. For free. He complained that wasn't really fair to him. He'd already put in hours on this project. I reminded him it had been 5 months for simple porch drawings when he'd promised 2 weeks. And now he wanted more money to fix his error. I laid out exactly what was going to happen. He was going to correct the plans to meet building code. He was going to resubmit them. And he was going to do it without charging me another dime. Because if he didn't, I'd make sure every single person I knew heard about this experience. I'd post reviews on every platform I could find. And good luck getting that second payment. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He finally agreed. He said fine, he'd submit the corrections. But this was really not standard practice. I told him neither was blaming your clients for your mistakes. I said to get it done and hung up. 2 weeks later, he emailed revised drawings. They were approved by the city a month after that. He did the bare minimum to fulfill his contract, and I paid him the remaining balance only because I didn't want the hassle of a legal fight. We ended up hiring a different contractor for the actual construction. They looked at his drawings and found 3 other code issues he'd missed. We never spoke to that designer again. I was running errands on a Saturday afternoon, just trying to get my shopping done and head home. The supermarket was moderately busy, nothing too crazy, and I was making my way down the cleaning supplies aisle when I heard a voice behind me. I turned around to see a middle-aged woman standing there with her arms crossed. She asked if I worked at the store. I told her no and apologized before starting to walk away. She yelled after me that she just needed something from the top shelf and that if I had any heart at all, I would help her out. I stopped in my tracks. Look, I get it. Sometimes you need help reaching something. But the way she said it, like I owed her something just for existing in the same space, rubbed me the wrong way. Still, I'm not a complete jerk. She could have just asked nicely from the start instead of yelling at me. But whatever. I told her I would help and asked what she needed. I walked back over to her. Instead of thanking me or even acknowledging that I came back, she let out this exaggerated sigh and said something about how hard it is to get help these days. I bit my tongue. I was already helping her for free, and she was complaining like I was getting paid to be there. I asked her again what she needed me to grab. She pointed up at a display pack sitting on top of the shelf. It was one of those cardboard displays that hold multiple cards of stain-removing pens, the kind stores put up there as extra inventory until they need to restock. The placement made it pretty clear these weren't meant to be sold right at that moment. I looked down and saw dozens of the exact same stain remover pens hanging on wire hooks right in front of us, like directly at eye level. You couldn't miss them if you tried. I pointed out that there were plenty of them right there on the hooks. She snapped her head toward me and went off in this rapid-fire tone. She said she wasn't blind and that she didn't want those ones. She demanded to know why I couldn't just do what she asked and said it wasn't a big deal. I rolled my eyes but decided to just get it over with. I reached up and pulled the first card out of the display pack. The moment my fingers touched it, I felt this gross, greasy texture. I looked down at my hand and it was covered in thick black dust, like I just dipped it in motor oil. Whatever was up there had been sitting untouched for months, collecting filth. The woman made a disgusted face when she saw my hand, then looked at the card I was holding out to her. She told me she didn't want that one and asked if I could grab one from the back of the pack. I stared at her for a second. My hand was literally black with grime, and she wanted me to dig deeper into this nasty display. I said sure. I started reaching back into the pack, trying to pull out another card from behind the first row But before I could even get my fingers around one, she told me to do it away from her so she wouldn't breathe the filth in. I froze. This woman had demanded I help her, snapped at me when I suggested an easier option, made me dig into a disgusting dusty display, and now she wanted me to move away from her like I was some kind of hazard. All while she stood there doing absolutely nothing. I let out a long sigh, dusted off my hands right there, and looked her dead in the eye. I told her to do it herself. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I could hear her sputtering. She called after me to get back there because she needed help. I didn't even slow down. I kept walking, leaving her standing there in the aisle with her arms crossed and her mouth hanging open. A couple of other shoppers nearby had clearly seen the whole thing. One older guy gave me a subtle nod as I passed him. I could still hear her going off behind me, but I was already halfway to the next aisle. When I continued my shopping, I spotted an employee restocking shelves a few aisles over. I almost went over to give them a heads up about the situation, but then I thought better of it. Let her go find an actual employee and make her demands to someone who's actually getting paid to deal with that attitude. I finished my shopping without any further incidents and headed to the checkout. While I was standing in line, I saw her storm past with an employee in tow, gesturing wildly and clearly complaining about something. The employee looked exhausted already, and they hadn't even made it back to the aisle yet. I felt a little bad for whoever had to deal with her, but not bad enough to regret walking away. When I loaded my groceries into my car, I looked down at my hand. There was still a faint black smudge on my palm from that disgusting display pack. I grabbed a wet wipe from my glove compartment and cleaned it off, shaking my head at the whole ridiculous encounter. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.